So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Brandon, for this last part of the material. So, this last part is the last part of this part of inductive logic. We are on page 7 to 8 on our handouts. And Brandon is going to talk about some applications of our theory of argument strength.
Thank you so much. A rousing rendition, as I recall. We blew the lid off the joint, let's be honest. We killed it. All right. So thank you to these are the hardcore people who did a thing, and I appreciate you making it in the morning too. Okay, so what I want to do this morning is, by the way, make sure everyone has handouts. Everyone have a handout? Okay. I want to talk about the theory in a little bit more detail, and then now we're going to talk about constructing models of the theory, which is what you do when you're applying theory to real cases. But first I want to give a much more detailed accounting of what the theory says. So it's a two-dimensional theory on the surface, right? It's probability on the x-axis, degree of relevance on the y-axis. But this presentation obscures the fact that really, in the finer-grained algebraic structure of what's going on, it's a three-dimensional theory. X, Y, and Z. You see here. Because the last row of that probability table is 1 minus the sum of X, Y, and Z. So in fact, this theory is a three-parameter theory. It has three real variables. And those are the adjustable parameters of the theory. Well, some of the other adjustable parameters are the interpretation of P and C in the real case. So you have to tell me what the argument is, and then you have to fill in these adjustable parameters. This is how science works. So we only have three adjustable parameters, so it's a relatively simple theory, but actually, it's pretty algebraically complicated. So here's our definition of argument strength, the qualitative definition. Of course, quantitatively, if you give me a distribution, there'll be some vector, some point in this four-quadrant space determined by that probability distribution. And as we saw last time, for every space inside the interior, there exists some probability distribution that gets you to that point. But let's just think about the qualitative theory of strength for a second. The qualitative theory of strength says an argument is strong qualitatively if it's probable and it's relevant. And those are threshold concepts because they're qualitative. Probable means the conditional probability is greater than a half. So the conclusion is more probable than not, given the premise. And relevant means that our relevance measure is greater than zero. Because remember, greater than zero is positive relevance, less than zero is negative relevance, and zero is irrelevance. Okay? Now, we can actually just solve algebraically for what that conjunction of constraints is. And you'll notice here, let me zoom in on this. That's quite a constraint. It's a quartic. It's a quartic. It's got an x to the fourth. That's a seriously complicated constraint. So although this theory is very simple, when you get down to the finer grained analysis, you realize it's actually not that simple. And what we can do is, using Mathematica, we can just visualize exactly the region of parameter space corresponding to the strong arguments. Here's what it looks like. It's got a very interesting valley-type structure to it. It's a fourth degree polynomial, okay? So it's kind of a weird shape. So this is x here, this is y, and this is z, okay? And if you take a look at this thing, it's kind of funny. Okay, but that's all there is to be said. That is a complete characterization of the arguments that are strong. That's all there is to know about the theory. It tells you everything you need to know. So, yeah.
But why there's this point there? Is this not, well, continuous, but it should not be derivable there, and this is stop. Why do you have this sort of angle up there?
What do you mean?
I mean, the right side. Yeah. It's the parameter, like this stop. What does it mean?
I'm not sure.
It's not differentiable, you know. I mean,
Oh, it is. This is just this polynomial inequality being. So it's
But maybe at the end, so at the limits, it's not.
right. It's a strict inequality. So when you get near the boundary, it's going to look. It's going to look weird.
Because I'm thinking about to take some derivative. You see if it's big, how.
Yeah, you don't need to though. This is just a closed form expression. This inequality tells you exactly what it means for an argument to be strong. That's it. It's a necessary and sufficient to get algebraic. And here's what it looks like. So it's a simple theory, but it's not. It's actually very sophisticated algebraically. It's not a trivial matter. Luckily, it's a decidable theory. We can use Mathematica to say everything we want to say about it. I'll talk about that more later. But that's for the afternoon, because that's part of the automated reasoning stuff I want to talk about. But I just wanted to show you for now a plot. Here's what the strong arguments look like. And that's all there is to be said. That's the full content of the theory. Qualitatively. Quantitatively is just, you give me a distribution, you get a point, you get a vector. Okay? That's the theory. So the theory has basically 5 adjustable parameters. You have to tell me what the premise and the conclusion are, and that's a whole other thing. We'll see. And then you got to fill in these 3 parameters I explained. So there's really 5 adjustable parameters. But that's it. That's the theory. And just to say a little bit more about some cases we've already looked at, the green dot corresponds to like the best possible argument, x therefore x for some contingent x. It's going to be maximally probable and maximally relevant. X therefore not x is the red dot. It's going to be all the way down here. That's the worst possible argument. And then this blue dot here, well, that's the one of the paradoxes of entailment. It's probable, but it's irrelevant. So it's not a strong argument. So while we're, in a sense, generalizing entailment, we're not strictly generalizing it. Our notion of strength cross-cuts. It says some valid arguments are not strong. And as it should, the paradoxes of entailment are not strong. And this gives you a fully classical explanation of why they're not strong. You don't need anything non-classical to understand it. And just put in terms of x, y, and z, the closed form expressions for the 2 dimensions. So it's actually, it's misleading. It's not, it's 3 dimensions. And it's, okay, so when we view it in 2 dimensions, we're obscuring the fact that what's really going on is this underneath. Okay, all right. So that's the theory. That's the content of theory. Now, what I want to get into, actually I have a few more things I want to say if that's okay, about the theory. So let me, by the way, I'm going to make all these notes available and a bunch of other stuff available on my website later today, including all the materials for automated reasoning. So you'll have all this stuff. Let me just take a little bit of time to talk about this, because I think this will interest people over here. So let's suppose that we're just talking about a strong argument, so according to our theory. And let's use the following notation for that. You can think of this as a consequence relation. So a natural thought is, what are its properties? Almost none. Okay, it's not transitive. You can easily prove this. I'm not going to do this, but you could just use PR set. You could use the probability table to arrange it. It's not transitive. It violates cut. It's not monotonic. I mean, obviously, that's the whole point of inductive logic. Okay. It satisfies almost no properties that logicians care about. That kind of makes sense. But I'll give you as an exercise a very interesting property it does satisfy. Here's a very interesting property. This is a very weird property. Suppose P entails Q in this sense of entailment. P entails Q and P entails R. Then what follows is either P entails the disjunction or it entails the conjunction. But in fact, neither of the individual inferences is valid, so this isn't valid. It doesn't follow from the premises here. This is not valid. P entails Q and P entails R, but P doesn't entail Q or R. And it also doesn't entail Q and R. So that's not valid. But this, with the disjunctive conclusion, is valid. Good exercise. It's just an algebraic proof. It's just an elementary algebraic proof. Okay, I'm not going to do it, but. So, here's another couple of interesting things about this consequence relation. One, it's decidable, obviously. It's a decidable theory. But here's an interesting thing. It's an open question whether it's axiomatizable. Open question. No one knows. No one knows whether this is axiomatizable. I mean finitely axiomatizable in like a first order way. No one knows. Surprising. It's a decidable theory. It's very simple. And yet it's a totally open question whether you can axiomatize the consequence relation. So if you're interested in a really interesting open problem, here you go. Solve that. That would be a really big story. There's a lot of people interested in this question, not just me, so, for various reasons. So that's interesting. It's a decidable consequence relation. It's relatively simple, but
is it finite or infinite language? It's given in the infinite language. Because if it's a finite language, we can prove that it's a finite axiomatic language. Okay? No?
well, no one has axiomatized it. It's not actually known whether it's finitely axiomatizable. It's not known. I mean, in general, it's not known. So even if you just look at this thing, probability of C given P greater than a threshold, that is unknown whether it's axiomatizable for thresholds greater than a half. For a half, it is axiomatizable, but for greater than a half, it's unknown. But when you combine it with the relevance thing, nobody knows whether you can have a finite set of, relatively simple rules. There'll be, of course, there's some ridiculous thing, but I mean, is there some, like, relatively simple axiom that you would be willing to call an axiomatization of a logic? You know what I mean? No one knows. It's an open question. So that's it. So those are just some interesting things for the logicians here that I wanted to point out. Okay, so that's all still the theory, but let's talk about applications. That's what mostly is supposed to be about. Okay, so what happens when you're applying a theory? What you do is you have to construct a model of a theory. And what does that involve? It involves at least a few things. You have to tell me what the premise is. You have to tell me what the conclusion is of the argument you're interested in. Then, if you really want a full answer, you have to specify values for these parameters, right? Now, you may not have to do all these things. It depends what you're trying to model, as we'll see. But to give a full model, this is what you would do. But you may not need all of this, as we'll see. It depends what aspects of the argument you're trying to model. Okay? So we'll see some cases where you do need to specify the whole thing. And we'll see some cases where you don't. You can give just a partial set of constraints and that'll be enough. Okay. So, first, before I do that, I want to come back to the limitations we talked about. So, the theory, or the apparatus of the theory, it's designed to model the strength of arguments, but the theory allows you to do much more than that, because once you have models of this theory, you can do other things. So, for instance, remember we talked about this, P by Q, and we said, well, that entails a bunch of stuff. One thing it entails is P and Q. But another thing it seems to imply is that, in some relevant sense, the probability of Q given P is less than the probability of Q. Or, in other words, if you look at our relevance measure, it'd be less than 0. Right? It rained last night, but the ground isn't wet. Okay, that implies, among other things, that the probability of the ground being wet, not being wet, given that it rained, is less than it would be if it didn't rain. So it's surprising that the ground isn't wet. This is a notion of surprise. So you can use the apparatus of the theory to model all kinds of stuff like surprise. If you like. Okay. Similarly for because, and so let me say a little bit more about because. So P because Q, well that implies P and Q as well. Because you can't explain something false and you can't explain something true by appealing to something false. Okay, but it also implies, among other things, that the probability of Q given P is greater than the probability of Q. In other words, that our relevance measure is greater than 2. Okay. But it actually implies more than that. Usually, depending on what because means, suppose this is like a causal because. There's a lot of different becauses, right? There's teleological explanation, there's all kinds. Well, let's suppose we're talking about the causal because. Well, there's more going on here. There'll be something like this. P is causally relevant. And for this, there are Bayesian causal models, probabilistic causal models, that you can use, which are special cases of our models. And here, if you want, you can look at a book called Causality by Pearl. I'll make that available in PDF, but that's a really good book to look at, from 2000. And in that book, he describes a class of network models, Bayesian models, probabilistic models. They're just models in probability calculus, okay, ultimately. So they fall under our aegis, but they're more complicated than at first it might seem. So suppose you have some causal network, which is supposed to represent a bunch of causal relations. Okay, you got X, and then Y, and then Z, and then maybe over here, you've got Q, or something, right? So you have P and Q occurring in some causal model, in some causal structure. Normally, when we talk about causal relevance, what we're talking about is not just this, but something a little different. We're talking about the probability of Q, given what Pearl calls do of P, is greater than the probability of Q unconditionally. Do of P is another kind of variable. And what do of P is when you intervene on the variable P and set its value, as opposed to just learning what its value is by conditioning, by supposing it to be true. You reach in and you set the value, okay? But that's no problem for us. We can represent that, because as long as we extra systematically interpret, in this case, P as do P, and we follow Pearl's rules for how to condition on do P, then we get a probability model. And now we'll be able to actually model the causal relevance of P.
When you say do P and act on P.
Intervene on P and set its value. Yeah, and Pearl has a whole procedure for how to do that, how to calculate the probabilities on that, as opposed to just conditioning on P. I'm not going to get into that, but what I want to point out is that's just a special case of our framework. There's nothing, it's just a class of probability models that are in probability calculus with a special interpretation for some of the variables. But that's fine. Remember, we can interpret the variables however we want. That's the beauty of the theory. We're not limited in how we interpret the variable, as long as we apply the right constraints. And that's what Pearl's book tells you how to do. How to apply the right constraints to capture causality as opposed to just conditioning. Okay? All right. So we can do that. Okay, and then we had this. We talked about if P then Q, where that's the English conditional. And we said, well, for sure that implies the material conditional. Because if the material conditional were false, then of course the indicative would be false, because that would mean P is true and Q is false. Well, in that case, the conditional is false. Okay, but it entails much more than that. And one thing it seems to entail is, again, that P is relevant to Q. And some people think it also entails that Q is probable. But if these things are both entailed, well, that's just what it means to say in our theory that this is a strong argument. And in fact, I do favor that interpretation of the indicative. I think it does imply that the argument from P and Q is strong. It might imply more than that, but it implies the truth of the material conditional, and also that the argument from P and Q is strong in our sense. P is relevant, and it makes Q probable. Does that make sense? So now, this isn't just for argument strength, it can be used to give a semantics for the indicative conditional in English. So the resources of this theory are very powerful. They're not just applicable to argument strength. They are, but they're applicable to anything that can be modeled in the probability calculus, which is a lot of stuff, including causation, including, okay. So we have all that, because we have all the models. Okay, but that's not really what we're here for. We're interested in argument strength. Okay, so let's talk about that. And we already saw that the paradox of this paradox of entailment is irrelevant, and so therefore not strong. What about this one? What about this argument? P and not P, therefore Q. Well, that's not going to be strong either, and the reason that's going to be weak on our theory is because you have to look at this conditional probability, and of course this is undefined. And I think that captures something very important. Why? I think it makes no sense to suppose a contradiction, a tautological contradiction. I just think that makes no sense. If you ask me to suppose that I weigh more than 100 pounds, and it is not the case that I weigh more than 100 pounds, I'm going to look at you funny. I'm going to say that's a defective supposition. And that's what this being undefined sort of captures. So I think this is the right answer. I think this argument is not strong. And the reason it isn't is because if you ask, could a contradiction be a reason to believe that something is true? No. How could it? I'd have to suppose that a contradiction is true, and then somehow that would raise the probability of something. That's absurd. It doesn't. Because those suppositions are broken. They're defective. It just doesn't make sense to suppose that a contradiction is the case. Okay, now, there's this issue in mathematics about reductio arguments. But remember, that takes us into a different realm, because now what we would have to do, if we were going to try to model those arguments, which we could, we'd have to abstract away from the logical structure, and we'd have to now imagine that we're talking about a case of logical learning. That's a very different kind of case. Okay, so just to remind you what I have in mind. So before we get into applications, I want to be honest about limits of the theory. Every theory has limits, because every theory is such that there'll be cases such that no model of that theory is adequate to the task. So here's such a case. Suppose you're in a logic class and you learn this. And now you think, well, wait, isn't that a good reason to believe this? I don't think for this example, it's a great example. And it's similar to Mike's example, too. I think Mike has a similar example. Yeah, we can't model this. This is outside the scope of our theory. Why? Because tautological claims always get probability 1. So nothing can be relevant to them. So we simply can't model. If this happens, which it does, of course, people learn logic, this happens. Of course it does. Beyond the scope. Every theory has phenomena which are beyond its scope, in the sense that every theory is such that there exists some phenomena such that there's no model of the theory that's adequate to the task of modeling that phenomenon. This is one for us. This is not a criticism. It's no more a criticism of our theory that this case can't be modeled adequately than it is a criticism of Newton's theory that the motion of Mercury can't be modeled adequately. Of course it can't. That's outside the domain of explanation of the theory. This is outside the domain of explanation of our theory. And that's fine. No theory will explain every phenomenon. It's life. Kids, get used to it. It's how science works. Okay, but I want to be honest about that. Okay, but now, I want to now also point out that this theory is very explanatory if it's used wisely and properly to model real arguments. It's actually extremely powerful as an explanatory theory. Just like Newton's theory, even though it's false. I mean, our theory's false. Look. Yeah, okay, who cares? Who cares? Okay, so let's start. I'm going to do examples from cognitive science because I really like these, and there's another reason, there's a more subtle reason I'll get into why I'm interested in these cases, which at the end I'll talk about that. But they're just interesting cases. So just to give you a little history, Kahneman and Tversky were, they're both passed away now. Kahneman ended his own life by choice last year in Switzerland at the age of 90. Tversky died of cancer. He was young. Anyway, they did this work, in the 70s up through the 90s, really. And they won a Nobel Prize. I mean, this was Nobel Prize work for economics. It's in behavioral economics, or I would just call it cognitive science. Okay, that's how I think of it. And what did they show? Well, that's actually very controversial, and I'm going to have a lot to say about that. But the story about what they showed was that the conventional wisdom about what they showed is that people are not good at performing certain kinds of inductive inferences. And here I just mean probabilistic inferences because that's everyone's assuming the framework there. And I'm going to be a little bit more precise, and I'm going to offer my own slightly different interpretation of this, which will be helpful later. Let's be a little bit more precise about what we mean. I mean they're not so good at assessing the strength of inductive arguments. Because that's what this all comes down to. That's what we're doing here. Inductive. That is non-deductive arguments. Which, by the way, are most arguments in life and most arguments in science. I love deduction, as you'll see later today, but it's really not that relevant to science, ultimately, unless you're working on theoretical science. Which almost nobody does, relative to how many people work on empirical science. Okay. Especially now with machine learning and everything, it's just even worse. It's even more obvious. Okay, so that's what they aim to show, that people, whether certain kinds, not always, but there are certain kinds of inductive arguments that people are not so good at assessing the strength of. That's kind of their claim. So let's take an example. And this is, not this one. Oh wait, before we do that, here's a fun example. So yeah, before I get into the conjunction fallacy, which is the first one, the base rate fallacy, which is the first one I'm going to do. Here, I just want to there's a question that you should be thinking about before we get into applications, which is, how do we fill in these adjustable parameters? Where do the probability functions come from? I mean, that's the $1 million question of this enterprise, right? Well, what I want to point out is that sometimes it's very easy to do that. Sometimes it's much harder. But, okay, that's true of every science. There'll be some phenomena that are easy to explain, some that are much more difficult, that constructing the models is much more difficult. Okay, but that's okay. Here's an easy case. Suppose you're Andreas. Does anyone play Texas No Limit Hold'em poker? Do you know how to play poker? Okay, it doesn't matter. I play poker. I'm a poker player. Anyway, doesn't matter because you see the percentages on there. So what we're seeing here is the current state of the game. And you don't need to know anything. They've calculated the probabilities for us. The probability that Andreas wins this hand, there's one more card to be dealt, this one, called the river card. Andreas has a 91% chance of winning right now. How do we know? Because it's a game of chance. Each card is equally probable to be drawn from the deck. This is an easy case. We know what the probabilities are. You understand? So some of these cases are very easy. So he has a 91% chance of winning here. But there's only 4 outs. An out is a way the other person can win. The only way Donacha can win is if he gets one of those aces or one of the 6s. Well, he got lucky, and he won. So this is a good case of but, it's a good case of because, if you look at it from the other perspective. It's also a good case of a strong argument. There's a very strong argument from the premise. Andreas faces the current poker situation, therefore Andreas will win. That's a strong argument, and it's easy, and everyone knows it's a strong, do you understand? So this isn't hard. I want you to realize there are very easy cases of these judgments and these models. This one's trivial. Okay, in this case, as often happens with amplitude inference, it doesn't go the way. Because there's always a problem. That's the nature of amplitude inference. There's no guarantees. This isn't deduction. Even with deduction, there aren't guarantees if what you mean is formal deduction because incompleteness. Anyway, but there's definitely no guarantees here. Anyway, I just wanted to give that's a fun example. So games of chance, super easy. We know how to do those. We know what the probabilities are. The models are obvious. We don't have to, there's filling in the parameters in that case is trivial. You can actually just fill in all the parameters. So I want to make that clear. And the first case we're going to talk about from cognitive science is also like this. It's also an easy case. And it's something called the base rate fallacy. Oh, shit, I didn't talk about the bachelor argument. Okay, I should talk about that before we do. So you might remember, there's the bachelor argument, right? John's a bachelor, therefore he's not married. And, well, according to deductive logic, that's invalid because these are just atomic sentences. And okay, maybe you can give a conjunctive analysis, but if we do another concept that doesn't have a conceptual analysis, you're stuck. Right? But no problem, because if the probability function encodes the meaning of bachelor, which it's allowed to do, probability functions can encode whatever you want them to encode. They can encode games of chance probabilities, right, like these, or they can encode the meaning of the bachelor or married, and when they do that, this is going to be a strong argument. Okay, so this solves the undergeneration problem of deductive logic. But let's get into the more interesting case. Okay, so here's the more interesting case, and I'll zoom in here. This case is called the base rate fallacy for reasons that will become clear. So here's a given, you're given a bunch of information, probabilistic information. And then you're going to be asked a question, okay, about probability involving this case. So here's the case. The unconditional probability of breast cancer is 1% for a woman at age 40 who participates in routine screening. That's one piece of information. And as we go along here, I'll just do this. Keep track of what we're being told. So this part here, this 1%, that's going to be the prior of age. Age is the hypothesis that a particular woman in question here from the relevant population has breast cancer. That's called the base rate also. That's why this is called the base rate fallacy. Okay, so the base rate of cancer in the population, the prior probability of age, is 1%. That's one piece of information. Second piece of information, the probability that such a woman would have a positive mammogram, given that she has breast cancer, is 80%. This is the likelihood of age relative to E. It's also called, sometimes, the true positive rate of the test. Why is it called the true positive rate? Well, it's saying, suppose she has cancer. How probable is it that she would get a positive result? That's the true positive rate. It's 80%, which is pretty good. It's not bad. So true positive rate. And then we get this final piece of information. The probability of such a woman having a positive test result, given that she doesn't have cancer, is 10%. This is what I call the catch-all likelihood. It's also known as the false positive rate. And this is a false positive rate because we're supposing she doesn't in fact get cancer, but nonetheless she gets a positive result. Make sense? Okay. Okay, and now the person's asked, the subjects in these psychological experiments were asked, what is the probability that such a woman has breast cancer given that she has had a positive mammogram? That you're being asked about the posterior of age. Okay, we're going to construct a model of our theory. okay, for this case. We have two propositions. H, this is going to be the conclusion of, sorry, this is going to be the conclusion of the argument. H, the hypothesis that such a woman has breast cancer. That's the conclusion of the argument. And then E is going to be the premise of the argument. And the E is the evidence that she had a positive mammogram in routine screening. And so here's the given information. Now we can use our theory to formalize the information we were given. And the information we were given was this. The probability of E given H, that's the likelihood of H, is 0.8. The probability of E given not H, that's the catch-all, is 0.1. And the prior, the base rate, is 0.01. And this seems like a pretty good way, in our framework, to construct a model to capture the given information. Does everyone see that? Or some of the given information, at least. Okay, now what the subjects were asked was, what do you think this probability is? The posterior. Well, we know from Bayes' theorem that the posterior is just a function of the three parameters we were given. And when you do the calculation, you get a very small probability, about 0.08. So 8% probably.
10 times less than.
Yeah. So now, why was this interesting? The reason it was interesting, because back in the day when this was done, I mean now a lot of people know about this, and maybe people have better literacy with probability, okay, whatever. But back in the day, most experts gave answers that clustered around 0.8. And this is important. It's very important because it's not just that we have to explain why people are giving what seems to be an incorrect answer, but there's a systematic way in which they're making an error. It's not just random, okay? It's clustered. That's part of, remember that, because that's going to be an important part of the explanandum. Okay. Well, we could just use our algebraic technique. I mean, to see what's really going on in our theory, we're going to just specify our three parameters here. And how do we do it? Well, we can just write down three equations with the three unknowns we were given. And when we solve those three equations with the given information, well, since there's only three parameters, three equations is sufficient to specify a precise probability distribution in our class of models. And there it is. I've just written it down. So that's really what's going on, right? Underneath. That's really what's going on. Okay. Now, one more fact about this case that I think is quite relevant is that when you calculate our relevance measure, you get an answer of about 0.8. I do not think this is a coincidence at all. I think this is an extremely relevant piece of information. And so let's go back to our map of arguments. Let's go back to our map here of arguments. Okay. So here's our map of argument strengths. And now we have a case in which, and all we need to know are the two parameters, so because we're just going to use that. We have a case where the probability of C given P is like 0.08 approximately, and the R value is about 0.8, roughly. So these are approximate, they're close enough. So if we go to map this argument, where's it going to be? Well, okay, it's 0.08 probable, so on the x-axis, where's it going to be? It's going to be way close to 0 here. But then, where's it going to be on the y-axis? Up here. 0.8. Let's just say 0.08. So it's going to be somewhere. It's a mixed case, and this is very important. It's not a coincidence, it's a mixed case. Okay, so in this literature, which is a super interesting literature, but there's some peculiar things about it. In the literature, it's just kind of assumed that when people give the answer they give about the probability, how probable the argument is, that they've committed a serious error. Now, I don't really want to get into whether or not they've committed a serious error. I'll just, if you want to say that they've committed a serious error, that's fine. What I'm interested in is why. Okay? But I actually think it's questionable whether they've committed a serious error. I don't want to take a stand on this here, but why do I say that? Because there's an ambiguity, according to me. Remember, the whole point of this two-dimensional theory is that this question is ambiguous. There's two things you might mean when you ask how strong an argument is. Because there are two things that are relevant to that. One is how probable the argument is. The other is how relevant the premise is. It's true that the subjects were asked about probability. That is true. But I don't think that's a decisive point here. And the reason is this. When you look at the history of inductive logic, as we saw some of it this week, remember, it started with this idea that there'd be a single function, a single dimension, that totally orders the strength of all the arguments. We saw, however, this is false. This is not an adequate theory. You need the relevance dimension as well. So, if inductive logicians were wrong about how many dimensions of assessment there were when assessing the strength of an argument, then that means the received view of the meaning of the question that the subjects were asked in this case at the time, in the 80s, was that it was equivalent to the question, how strong is the argument? That's false. It's not equivalent to that. Those questions aren't equivalent. But the theoreticians did take it to be equivalent. So you can see how they would think at the time, this just proves people are bad at assessing the strength of arguments. Why? Well, because all there is to the strength of an argument is how probable it is. So when I ask someone how probable the argument is, I have asked them how strong the argument is, without remainder. This is a mistake. It's a mistake in the methodology of the entire enterprise. It's a false presupposition of the experimental setup. So I don't want to get into a debate about this, but I do think it's quite plausible to suggest that that's a flaw in the experimental setup, and that the more relevant question to ask would be, how strong is the argument? Okay, now I want to say a little bit more about this, because in this case, remember what we're talking about. We're talking about a diagnostic test. And what do we know about diagnostic tests? Well, we talked about pregnancy tests as an example, because people may be more familiar with that. What's the deal with diagnostic tests? Oh, well, you go, you buy one. It doesn't have to be a mammogram. Mammogram, it's nothing special about a mammogram here. It's just a diagnostic test. But let's talk about one that we are more familiar with, like a pregnancy test. It's the same thing, okay? You go to the store, you buy the test. What does the box tell you? It does not tell you how probable it is that you're pregnant if you get a positive result. Diagnostic tests do not tell you the posterior in general. They can't. How could people designing a diagnostic test know how probable it is that you're pregnant given the positive test? They couldn't, unless they know a lot more about you than they can discover in the laboratory about the mechanics of the test. They're not in a position to know. Thank you very much. And it's kind of none of their business. Okay? So now, the mammogram's no different. It's just a diagnostic test. Okay? Now, it's true that the subjects were told this. That's true. They were. They were told, they were just given this assertion, the prior probability is 1 in 100. Okay, But wait, we're talking about a particular person here, sampled from this population. What's the prior probability that that person has cancer? You think you can just read that off the base rate? Well, not so obvious. Well, certainly if you knew more about the particular person, you'd have a better informed estimate of that prior probability, wouldn't you? And it might well turn out that the answer is much higher than the base rate suggests. So, why am I bringing all this up? Because I think there's a very important difference between the two dimensions. This dimension is very dependent on the prior. This dimension is not, at least in these cases, it's not at all dependent on the prior. What do I mean? So when they're designing a pregnancy test, or mammogram, but let's take the pregnancy test, that's better. When they're designing a pregnancy test in the laboratory, they're able to gather lots and lots of data and do lots of experiments. And so when they give you those true positive and false positive rates, those don't depend on the prior. Those are just causal regularities involving the relevant chemicals being detected in the sample. They don't depend on prior probabilities at all. That's why they can be determined in the laboratory without knowledge of the subject performing the test. Okay? So what I'm telling you is, there's something more objective about this dimension, at least certainly in these cases. This is much more, if you will, subjective. It depends much more on properties of the subject that couldn't possibly be known by an experimenter designing a diagnostic test, and don't need to be known to estimate accurately the true positive rate and the false positive rate of the test. Is everyone following what I'm saying here? This is very important. This is also going on in the background. So, here's what's happening. You're given this information. It determines immediately a value for R. This value is trivial to calculate. They're basically giving it to you because they're just giving you the ratio of the likelihoods. They're just giving you the value of the relevance measure, basically. It's super easy to calculate that. And then they give you the prior, and they ask you to do this weird calculation, which requires solving 3 equations and 3 unknowns in your head. What do you think is going to happen? So when a person is asked an ambiguous question, and that question has 2 dimensions of assessment that determine the ambiguity, one of which can be objectively answered immediately by the given information without calculation, and the other requires solving 3 equations and 3 unknowns. And you know how it is when someone asks you a question. You're supposing there's an objective answer. So what are you going to revert to in a confusing case such as this? I claim the more objective information and the information that's more easy to calculate. There's absolutely nothing surprising what's going on here when you have our theory. If you don't have our theory, all of the considerations I just said are invisible to you because you think all that matters is the probability. That's just wrong. It's absolutely wrong. That's not what matters. In fact, I claim, in some of these cases, relevance matters more. Why? Not just because it's easier to calculate, but because it's more objective. It doesn't depend on the vicissitudes of what's happening with the individuals in the population, or with your prior beliefs or anyone else's prior beliefs. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Okay. I think this is very helpful for explaining what's going on here. But I want to go a little deeper on this case before we get to the next case. How much time do we have?
About 10-15 minutes.
Okay, good. I'm going to take a little bit more time on this case because there's a point that I want to make. which is a little bit more philosophical now. There's something deeply ironic about this research. Deeply ironic in a philosophical, in a philosophy of science sense. So let's not talk about diagnostic tests. Let's talk about scientific experiments, which really are just diagnostic tests, if you think about it. They are diagnostic tests. What happens when you want to do a scientific experiment? Well, you have some hypothesis H that you're testing with the experiment that you're designing. And then the experiment's going to generate some evidence. This is going to be evidence that's going to be generated by the experiment. Now, when you're designing an experiment, what is it that you're trying to do? Think by analogy with when you're designing a diagnostic test. What do you want? What makes a diagnostic test good? What makes a diagnostic test good? The likelihood ratio, the relevance measure, because that's all you can assess in the laboratory. So what you're trying to do here is maximize something like the absolute value of this relevance measure. I say absolute value because you don't know whether the experiment's going to generate positive or negatively relevant evidence. But what you want to know is how powerful, how much relevance it has. You want it to be maximally relevant. Why? Because you can't control the posterior. The posterior probability of a hypothesis depends on the prior probability that a scientist assigns to it. You don't know anything about that. How do you know what a scientist who's reading the experimental results knows? You don't know what they know. You can't know what they know. All you can do is design the experiment, which means all you can do is try to maximize this. Just like the designer of the diagnostic test. An experiment is a diagnostic test, designed to diagnose whether the world is such that H or such that not H. That's what a scientific experiment is. It's a diagnostic test that's trying to diagnose whether the world is such that H or such that not H. That's what an experiment is. And so all you can do when you're designing an experiment is maximize this. You can't maximize the posterior. That depends on the prior that the scientist who's interpreting the results comes into the interpretation with. You don't know that. You don't know who's reading your paper. Okay, so now, when you read scientific papers, scientists know this. Because what do they report? What do scientists report? Posteriors? No. They couldn't possibly report posteriors. That would depend on the prior beliefs of the scientist who's interpreting the experimental results. But they don't know you. They don't know you like that. Okay? So, there's a real irony in this Kahneman and Tversky paper. Because read the paper. What does it do? It designs an experiment. So, you ready? Here's what they do. Their H is people are bad at estimating, and I'm going to be charitable here. I'm not going to talk about argument strength, because even though I think it's wrong, but people are bad at estimating, let's say, the probability of, and I'll use a different notation now, little h given little e when probability of little h is small, or something like that, right? When it's a small probability, okay. And the evidence is, well, that was what was generated by the experiment they designed. I'm talking about their psychological experiment. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm going meta here, but this is very important to do, I think. But now there's a huge irony in what's happening in this paper. The paper's criticizing people for being bad at estimating a thing that their paper doesn't even claim to establish in their own case. Of course it doesn't, because science doesn't deliver posteriors, it can only deliver likelihood ratios. Do you understand the irony here? This is deeply ironic. They're saying, look how bad you are at doing a thing that if you're properly interpreting our paper, you can't do. I mean, it's not that hilarious.
Well, in a certain sense, it's self-contributory.
Well, I don't want to get too deeply into this, but I do think there's a deep irony here. Because the very thing that they're trying to establish about subjects is the type of thing that by their own scientific standards, their own paper can't establish. Namely, the posterior of the hypothesis they're testing. So isn't it ironic for them to complain, oh, you people are so bad at determining posteriors, when science isn't in the business of determining posteriors, including their own paper?
Some people is very bad, including ourselves.
No, well, no. But I'm making a different point. I'm not. In a way, it's irrelevant in the philosophy of science how good people are at estimating posteriors, because that's not what experiments can establish anyway. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's super weird to focus as a scientist on the estimation of a quantity that your own scientific methodology does not claim to establish. This is weird, okay? So what I want to do, and what we did in this paper that I cited in the notes is, what we have done is we did a bunch of experiments, and now a bunch more experiments have been done to fully test this. But what we've done is we did a bunch of experiments where we varied the relevance parameter. And guess what? It makes a huge difference to how bad people are at estimating the posterior. Yeah, of course it does, because what people are doing is responding to the more objective thing that's going on in the context, namely how relevant the thing is, which after all is all the design of the experiment can guarantee. And now I'm just going to the meta level and I'm pointing out that's also true of their own experiment, which is about probabilistic reasoning. Same thing, it's a scientific experiment. All it gives you is likelihood ratios. So they would never criticize you if you read their paper and said, gee, I wonder what the posterior probability is of people being bad at estimating posterior probabilities. They'd say, oh, no, we're not committed to that. No, we're just generating relevant evidence to the hypothesis. Because that's what, you see what I'm saying? Deeply ironic. I'm not saying there's any incoherence here, but what I'm saying is a lot more work needs to be done here. And now that work has been done since that paper we wrote. There's been tons of papers showing that when you fiddle with the relevance parameter, that's making a huge difference to how people do. And so here's my conjecture. My conjecture is when you ask someone how probable something is given something else, what they hear is, how strong is this as a reason to believe this? In other words, what they hear is, how strong is the argument in my sense that I'm trying to explicate with my theory? And if they're smart, they realize that has two components, one of which is more objective, namely the likelihood ratio, one of which is more subjective, namely the posterior. Plus, the posterior requires you to solve 3 equations and 3 unknowns, and the ratio is given. Should we be shocked at what people do here? No. And so there's now a whole series of papers showing how relevant relevance is to what's happening. But it shouldn't be surprising. If you're a scientist, you know that relevance is the objective thing. Make sense? Okay, do I have 5 minutes? Can I take 5 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Let's talk about the conjunction fallacy. Fallacy again, right? Okay, so I don't want to argue about that. I'm just interested in being more explanatory and understanding what's going on. So let's talk about the conjunction fallacy. And that's all I'm going to go here. So here we go. Very simple. We're given some evidence E about a woman named Linda. Linda's 31, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Imagine, this was written in 1980, so you can imagine a lady who went to UC Berkeley during, the late 60s and was a flower child and all that stuff. That's what they own on. Question, is it more probable, given E, that Linda is a bank teller or that she's a feminist bank teller? Now, maybe people are more familiar with this now, but back in the day, a lot of people said feminist bank teller was more probable, which is just obviously absurd. Here, you only need logic to understand why that's absurd. Being a feminist bank teller is true in a strictly smaller set of possible worlds than being a bank teller, and since probability is a measure of the size of sets of possible worlds, it can't possibly be that it's more probable that the logically stronger thing is true. Of course not. That's absurd. So what's going on? Here's what's going on. I claim in this case we have the following two facts. Of course it's more probable that she's a bank teller, but the evidence is more relevant to her being a feminist bank teller. This dimension goes this way, the Y dimension goes the other way. And we're at cross purposes again. Remember, the last case was low probability, high relevance. This is more probable, less relevant. And in fact, what we show in our paper, and I won't get into this, I leave this as an exercise. What we show in our paper is that as long as a relevance measure satisfies these two conditions in the case, then it will follow. Less relevant will follow. Okay, that's the exercise. So what do these conditions say? First condition says, the evidence is just not positively relevant to her being a bank teller. The story I told you about, it just isn't positively relevant to whether she's a bank teller. That's what this says. That seems right. And what the second thing says is suppose she is a bank teller. The evidence is still relevant to her being a feminist. That's what this is a conditional relevance measure. Suppose she's a bank teller. Now ask yourself, is the evidence still relevant to her being a feminist? Yes. And here's a theorem, which you can prove. Any relevance measure satisfying these two will be such that less relevant holds. And in fact, in particular, that's true for our measure. You have to add a third argument to our measure, right, to do it, because you have to condition on something and then make it. But it doesn't matter. It's a simple little generalization of our measure. So here's again what I think is going on. They're giving people a question about how strong two arguments are. Here's my reading. They give you two arguments. And they ask you. They say which is more probable, but again, for these guys, that was equivalent to which is stronger because they were wrong about having one dimension, okay? So I say what they really are being asked is, which is stronger? And it's ambiguous because the answer is this, that, call this argument 1, call this argument 2. The answer is 1 is more probable, 2 is more relevant. And again, there's lots of experiments that have been done that have shown when the thing is relevant that people give the wrong answer. No kidding. Duh. You would have known that if you already had a two-dimensional. You'd be like, of course that's going to be relevant. But they couldn't see that because the conventional wisdom about inductive logic is it's one dimension and that dimension is conditional probability. And this goes back to Carnap. But they were all wrong, you see. And this theory now allows us to explain not only what's going on with the strength of arguments, which is a logical and epistemological matter, but what's going on in cognitive science with these fallacies of inductive reasoning. Again, I don't want to get into a debate whether they're making mistakes or not. People make mistakes. Who cares? What I'm interested in is why. And in particular, I want to know not just whether there's an explanation, but whether there's a rational explanation. And there is. And the answer is, two things are relevant to whether an argument is strong. How relevant the premises are, and how probable the argument is. And if you don't take that into account, you create lots of problems and fallacies and things you can't model and things you can't understand. So, maybe people aren't as bad at inductive reasoning as I just want to throw out there. Maybe they're not as bad as the work of cognitive diversity would suggest. And I will stop and I will leave you there. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, well, maybe. Thank you so much for this applicable thing that I'm anxious, so I wanted to get to this point, but I found that interesting. I don't know if in this fallacy of that we see of the woman who's a feminist, and I was thinking about that example that I gave you when you have like a scientific experiment and the result is the p-value is high, but at the same time it's clinically insignificant. So I wonder where the relevance is and the probability is in this case when you have these two results.
Good. Okay, so now we're getting into like the underlying statistics. So let's go back just to the base rate case, because I think that's actually a better case to illustrate this. So in the base rate case, we were just given the probabilities, which is already very artificial. Okay, but especially the prior. What does that mean? Okay, but anyway, what you're really asking is about how we determine the probabilities. So here I'm just giving applications where you can say very definite things because there's enough information is given that we can just apply the models and get good answers. But in real life, this isn't what happens. In real life, in science, in order to fill in those adjustable parameters, you've got to do a lot of statistics, among other things. Okay? And so one of the things you need to do is try to estimate these likelihoods. Okay? You're trying to estimate these things. This is a hard thing to do, very difficult thing to do. And this is where your question becomes relevant. So when you're, and I wouldn't want to use p-values because I'm a Bayesian, so I'd want to cast that in terms of Bayesian statistics, but that's okay. That's okay, because look, we'll have a bunch of data, right? And p-value is one way to evaluate it. But let's say we were evaluating it as a Bayesian so that we would try to get these likelihoods, right? What are we going to do? Well, there's a lot of work that has to go into, a lot of statistical work that goes into trying to estimate these, okay? Based on data. And this is what people in the laboratory do, right? They have all this data. They have tons of statisticians trying to figure out what are these likelihoods for, say, a pregnancy test, just as an example. And now, it may turn out that in the course of trying to estimate one of these likelihoods, right, they might be doing some classical statistics there. I mean, I don't know. That's now down to just methods, okay? Suppose that in one of these companies, they're doing classical statistics. So there may well be cases where they get a good p-value, right? A significant result, but the effect size is really small, okay? I think what would happen in that case depends on the details of the case, right, of course, because, but in a simple diagnostic testing case, what I think would happen in that case would be they'd want to continue to do more experiments, because I think what that would suggest is they haven't really figured out what these likelihoods are. They're not there yet, okay? Because when you're doing this, you want there not to just be significance in your estimates, but you want there to be a big effect. Of course, when you're designing a test, you want the effect size to be big, and that's part of what goes into what I'm calling the likelihoods. That's underneath. That's part of what I would call the epistemology of determining the likelihoods, which is statistics, of course, and among other things, but it's statistics primarily in a lot of these cases. So what you're really asking about is one level deeper in the story than I'm getting into, because I'm just taking as given the probabilities. But of course, that's not what happens. These companies spend years doing statistical analyses to figure out what these likelihoods are. And during the course of that, they might have a lot of inconclusive experiments. Well, they wouldn't release the product then, I think. They'd only be willing to release the product with published likelihood ratios if they were really confident in those estimates. And part of being confident in those estimates is not just having a good p-value, but also the effect size being big, perhaps, depending on the case. I mean, but I think that's true for these diagnostic tests. So this is where your question comes in. It comes in one level deeper. I didn't want to get into that because that's so far beneath this level. We're logicians. We're providing a theory and a framework. And yes, when you apply it, you have to fill in these parameters. But then there's a level deeper. Where right? Where do the underlying parameters? Okay, so up here we're just filling in these parameters. But remember, the real story is there's actually 3 parameters that have to be filled in: X, Y, and Z. That's hard work. And for me, I would say that's hard work by Bayesian statisticians, since this is a Bayesian framework. But they might use classical testing too for some of their, at some stages of their testing. That's fine. But what they're trying to do in this framework, what they would be trying to do is come up with reliable estimates of those likelihoods. And that's a Bayesian thing. It's a Bayesian thing. So this really is more amenable to Bayesian statistics being done in the background. But the question still applies. You're going to have cases where you're not ready to publish those likelihood ratios because you're not really sure that the effect size is significant enough and so on, or whatever other test you're using before you're willing to publish and say, yeah, this is a reliable test. You see what I mean? So you're asking one layer deeper. How do we come to know it's a reliable test? Yeah, I didn't get into that because that's 2 layers. That would be a level of application that's really in the weeds. Do you know what I mean? So a similar thing could happen if I was explaining to you the historical episode of Einstein versus Newton and the motion of Mercury. How would I do it? Well, I would just talk about the perihelion. You know how many centuries it took to get an accurate estimate of the perihelion? I mean, it's so much statistical work to do. So the full story is 100 years of statistics in astronomy. You see what I mean? That's the analogous thing. We're way up here in inductive logic world. And I'm trying to give you a glimpse into the applications, but we're just scratching the surface. Of course, not my job. That's for the statisticians to do, you know. I mean, it's division of labor. I hope that helps. Yeah.
That's a fantastic analysis. I really
Thank
know
you.
it.
Thank you.
It's part of your work. I know you are working together with other people.
Yeah, psychologists. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a really fabulous thing. My opinion, frankly speaking, I'm not gonna, it deserves a second Nobel Prize.
Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. And I'll tell you why. You know why? Because it is even helps us to understand why large language models are not that good in reasoning. You know why? Because we people, we smell relevance.
Yeah.
Even if we make mistakes, we smell relevance. They do not.
Yeah.
And that's very, very important. I mean, that's a key for understanding what
Yeah.
they are wrong.
Or maybe they could. Maybe they could. I mean, you know, this is a matter of training and learning and all this stuff. But what you're right. One of the things they're going to have to pick up on is the ability to assess the strength of arguments.
Yeah.
And then you're right. I think people have a natural ability to detect relevance.
They smell.
Yes, scientists especially,
Yeah.
through the likelihood ratios of their tests, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, people are really good at detecting relevance. I think that's a very important.
Even if they make mistakes.
Well, sure, everyone makes
Oh, yeah.
mistakes.
Okay.
Everyone makes mistakes, but I think it's quite natural to be distracted by relevance information because that is the kind of thing that we have access to. It's more objective. It's readily available, generally much more than the probabilities. You have to do all these calculations. I mean, who's going to solve 3 equations of 3 unknowns in 5 minutes on a survey? No, not going to happen. That's not what people are doing.
No, another important point is how can we establish that relevance and probability are completely distinct, completely independent?
They're not independent. They're not independent, see? We know exactly the relation between them. It's algebraically determined.
This is the relation.
That's what relevance is in terms of X, Y, and Z, and that's what the probability is. That's the exact algebra.
No, that's established the connection between them, but in principle, they are completely independent variables, right?
They're independent enough that we can call them 2 dimensional.
Well, yeah.
In the sense that you can reach every point in the space
Yeah.
for some probability. Yeah,
That-
they're at least that independent. They're not ruling out,
Yeah.
except for the edges. Except for
Now,
the edges.
establishing independence in the like x and y in a function, we are, if you say f function from x to y is x squared plus y times 3, we're going to establish, we're sort of establishing.
Yeah, but these are really non-linearly. This is a
Yeah.
really complicated space, but they're not ruling each other out.
Yes.
They're not logically ruled. They're at least logically independent. At least not on the edge cases, on the inside.
That's fabulous. It's really.
Anyway, well, thanks. I hope I'd be nice to win a Nobel Prize. I mean, it comes with $1 million. That would allow me to do a lot. I mean, I don't care about that other stuff, but the money would be nice.
Just write a book saying why everyone is wrong.
Oh, that's not my style. I wouldn't really want to do that. I'm more just interested in understanding what's happening.
No, that's fine.
But thank you so much.
José Lu, And Alejandro.
Yeah, thank you, brother. This was amazing. I mean, the way you are responding to Kahneman and Tversky, it reminds me to this theory in the philosophy of cognitive science called relevance theory. So there is this guy that took Grice's maximum of relevance and he applied it to cognitive science.
Yes.
And I mean, the way you are responding is like appealing to minimizing cognitive effort
Yes.
and maximizing this objective information that is the likelihood ratio.
Yes.
So there you have some reasons to support your response. Yeah, there are.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very glad that you said that because there's a paper, the recent paper that came out, which I'll post. I will post this paper because now that you mentioned it, this is really important. So there's a paper by Dorst, is one of the authors, and Mandelker, and then a psychologist, and I'm sorry, but I forget his name. And it's about the conjunction fallacy, and it's follow-up to our work. And they argue that yes, probabilistic relevance is relevant, but so is relevance in the more traditional pragmatic sense. And so they offer a thing of probabilistic relevance plus pragmatic relevance. And that's a really nice paper to look at because I think they're right, and I think they've designed experiments that show that probabilistic relevance, is explanatory, but there does seem also to be other pragmatic dimensions of relevance that are relevant as well, and I'm sure that's true. I mean, so I'm generally a pluralist. Here I've given you a two-dimensional theory, but let's be honest, it's likely there are many other dimensions that are relevant to the assessment of the strength of arguments. I mean, that seems plausible. And they claim to have identified one. So they have this account where everything's relative to a question. So it's a different way of setting up things, because I'm just doing it in a standard kind of descriptive possible worlds thing. But they're talking about questions, which are like partitions of the space of possible worlds. And those are determined by pragmatic relevance. Yeah. So they're pushing our thing further. I actually think probabilistic relevance is still relevant there too, at a different level, but I do agree, of course, inquiry is always relative to a question, and that's a pragmatic. So I mean, I think I agree with that. So I welcome this. I think there are many kinds of relevance that are relevant. And I think it's really tragic that the history of inductive logic completely ignored any kind of relevance, even probabilistic, and these are probability guys. They had it, it's there, they already have it. It's already given by the distributions once they're specified. They already had it, and they weren't using it. But you're right, there's many other things, of course, going on in these cases, I'm sure. As is true in psychology in general, there are going to be tons of. And so, this is a good example. Our models are adequate to certain explanatory tasks up to a point. But then you can find new experiments, like the ones that they've designed, where it looks like probabilistic relevance isn't going to be enough, together with probability, to get you the full explanation. Okay, yeah. Then you need a new class of models. I welcome this. This is a new class of models. This is science. That's how science is done. So I welcome that. I think that's great. I think the intervention that I'm interested in making is a very specific historical one where I'm just talking to the people who are already using probability. They're already using the full distributions. They have the information about relevance in our sense already. They just ignored it. So it's in a way worse than what Mandelker and Dorst have discovered because, well, question sensitivity goes way beyond the way those psychologists were thinking about things, but mine doesn't. My quantity is already determined by the quantities they have by their own lights. So I'm more interested in a simpler and more fundamental intervention. But you're absolutely right, of course. I mean, there's going to be many things.
Yeah, and I had one more comment. You mentioned that we need to look not just for explanations, but rational explanations. Okay.
That's what I like. Yeah, that's what I want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the model I presented on attention, I mean, I remain neutral about rationality of these attention policies, but now that you're giving a numeric precise definition of relevance, maybe I wonder if there might be some kind of potential policy driven by this probabilistic relevance that might explain learning blindness and those kind of effects.
Well, that's a great idea. That's a terrific idea. I like that a lot. Yes. Using probabilistic relevance as kind of a trigger for attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, we should talk about it.
We
should certainly discuss that. That's a terrific idea. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, I just want to say three things. The first one, I thank you for the talk. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
The second one, maybe if you can share with us the name of the papers. So
Yeah, I'm gonna actually create a folder with with a bunch of stuff in it. Yeah. No, I'm gonna do that.
And the last one, I think this is huge because Kahneman and Tversky were uncomfortable by the idea of traditional economics to assume that individuals are rational when we are talking about decision making. And they in fact empirically prove something about it. But considering your work, I think you are kind of generalizing what they are talking about, because the reason that they give was that humans have some cognitive biases, and they classify in, I don't know how many, I remember between 10 and 20 different cognitive biases.
Yeah.
But as far as I understand your theory, you are kind of generalizing. Maybe there are not 13 cognitive biases. Maybe it's just one. The cognitive bias
Yeah.
to being rational or to being objective.
Yeah,
Because that
or
explains.
and also maybe pragmatic relevance.
Yeah.
So my suspicion is, that's a great question, thank you so much. My suspicion is that's exactly right. I think that proliferation of biases, there's too many. I think it can be reduced. Maybe it's more than 2, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4, but is it 13? That feels like a kind of ad hoc classification to me.
Exactly. I think this because maybe the question is not that humans are bad and calculating subjective stuff. It's more like we are too rational. Even when we are asking or when we are interpreting subjective information. So I don't know if you are, but you, for further work, you can check all the work of Kahneman and Tversky, and you can make a huge claim, like maybe there's not 20 cognitive bias. Maybe we can just reduce to 1 cognitive bias. Maybe we are too rational.
It's probably more than 1 or 2. There's a few. You know, I think pragmatic relevance, probabilistic relevance for sure. And the reason I'm so into that is because they already had it. They had all the information. They didn't know about question sensitivity. That stuff came later, but they knew about it's determined by the probabilities they're using. So, you know, that's why I totally agree with that. And I'm going to post a whole bunch of interesting papers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to post a bunch of stuff. Thank you guys so much.
Rodolfo, there's a
Yes, absolutely.
last
Short
question.
question. What would be a not rational explanation? What is a not rational explanation? I'm interested in a rational explanation.
Any craziness is
What
around.
is a rational, not rational?
Yeah, well, suppose that I'm wrong and there really is just one dimension of argument strength, and it's probability. Suppose that's true. Well, then it would be a lot harder, at least for me, to come up with an explanation that's a rationalizing explanation. Because if there is only one way of interpreting that question, then whatever is explaining what they're doing, and maybe it's just the fact that they don't have time to do the calculations or that they're in a rush, that kind of thing wouldn't be a rational explanation. Right? If you just don't have time to solve the equations and you take a guess, guessing isn't rational, at least sometimes, right? But if there's these 2 dimensions, and relevance is actually readily available and more objective, and it's the kind of information scientists exchange, then reverting to that seems pretty rational to me. You see what I mean? Whereas if it's just, you took a guess because you didn't have time, and you just you anchored to 0.8 was one of the numbers in the given, you just anchored to that. And you thought, the test is reliable, and you saw 0.8, you just anchored to 0.8. That wouldn't be rational. Yeah, so it just depends on what's actually happening. My guess is it's more subtle than that, and maybe there is a good rationalization. I think in both of these cases, there is a rational explanation available. Whether that's what people are actually doing, I'm not so interested in, because I'm, as a philosopher, more interested in the interface between the descriptive and the normative. So what I'm kind of interested in is a how possibly rational explanation exists, even if that's not actually what happened. But that's because I'm a philosopher, so I would be interested in that.
Okay, so we are out of time. Let's thank Brent.
Kind of skip the
It was too quick.
He was a master student, supervised by film, and now he got the Fulbright grant that he will explain to you later. And Walter was a Humboldt researcher, right? And he will explain what this grant is. And I will explain about the FAPEST grant, which is the São Paulo State research support. So you want to start?
Yeah, I'd like to start saying funny. I am a sort of a champion of getting grants, right? I got money from Luxembourg, Portugal, France, Italy, never from the United States. They never gave any money to me. I was working for free. Not blame you.
I didn't have anything.
But, I mean, usually there are lots of opportunities. There's lots of money in the world waiting for good students. But I mean, lots. Usually, they are offering more master grants than anything else because nobody wants to do a master now in Europe or United States. So they have opportunity, they have an open place, but people usually in Brazil, they don't want to go for a master. Why? Because they get a master degree, and when they come back to the country, they are losing opportunities for a PhD. So what's really interesting is to have a PhD grant or a postdoc grant, right? And there are lots of opportunities. The one good thing is to be a member of our Brazilian Logic list, right? Lista dos Lógicos Brasileiros, where, I don't know if you know it, there's lots of opportunities there from Denmark, from China, from Sweden, from Italy, from Spain, Portugal.
Google Group Lógica.
Logic dash L. Logic dash L.
O FRN, ele monta up here, if you want to
UFRN. Yeah, this is a list of Brazilian logicians organized by my ex-student Joe Marcos, who's very well organized, and they usually receive many advertisements from all over the world for grants and all opportunities. That's a good thing. And now, concerning my experience, one of the two best ways I got grants were Germany and Luxembourg. Luxembourg has an enormous amount of money, and they are very rich, small country, and they are looking for people. People don't go there because they don't know where it is.
It's nice, it's very nice.
They don't know what the language they speak, etc. People get sort of not very comfortable to get there. But I tell you that there are many opportunities, many opportunities, especially for postdoc researchers. they're looking for people. And their line of work is in like of economics mixed with logic, reasoning, this kind of graph argumentation, not your theory of argumentation, but it's like don't or
Yeah, the graphing.
graphic argumentation, like arguments and counter arguments, making computer programs that looking for other like a logic of writing contracts, for instance, right? Using modal logic, using lots of things, using non-classical logic. That was my work there. And there was a special person there named Leon van der Tory, who is the director of the group. He's a very clever guy, very open guy. I really recommend you to look. I have some papers I distribute you, some handouts with addresses I never seen. It's coming because it's printing. Yeah, I have some problem printing. But that's one good thing, so it looks good. Another is Germany. These Humboldt Stiftung, Humboldt Foundation, they have many opportunities for, and I know because I am a member of this Humboldt Club, and I'm aware, I'm a sort of ambassador in some sense. I can help you people to prepare your project. It's not that hard to get. I mean, many people here got already. I was one of the first, actually I'm the first one that got this Humboldt grant in mathematics. You know, by the time I was in mathematics department, they have many programs in mathematics, in philosophy, logic, and many places. And they offer, it's really good. They offer like, for a postdoc, like 3,000 euros a month, plus some money for kids, plus money for insurance, plus money for travel. It's really excellent. Really good. And they also have some grants for PhD, especially on the side of something named DAAD, which offers grants. So it's not really difficult to get. And then there's Portugal. Portugal, there are some opportunities. Spain, less, Netherlands. Some countries that don't give you any money. Switzerland, zero. They give some money to Einstein, but because Einstein was working.
Yeah.
Switzerland does not give me the money. Italy, more or less. And other countries, I mean, other European countries do not. But there is a whole European grant named Marie Curie Fellowship. There's a, for the whole Europe. The headquarters are in Belgium, and they really give many opportunities. So if you look for it, you find it. So many possibilities. But in Brazil, there's a lot of opportunity here. I think you can talk about it. Brazil, we have the FAPESP, São Paulo State Organization. It's really good and first one in the world. You know, the first one like comparable to National Science Foundation or Humboldt Foundation.
Yeah,
FAPESP.
for example, Kiri is German, and he came here because he said that FAPESP is better than the grant he would have gotten.
Yeah.
Like in Germany, it's very hard to get the good grants because there's a lot of competition. But the FAPESP grant he received here is good for him.
FAPESP then is the first one, but every state in Brazil has one named FAP, F-A-P. They then FAPERG, FAPEMIG, FAPEPERG. Each state has a FAP, but the best one from São Paulo, they have a lot of money for research, and they like to give money for people, to attract foreign people here. Yeah, that's really good. So, and there's CNPq and CAPES, other possibilities here. Usually our students, they have if they're very good one, they get a FAPESP grant, or otherwise they get a second one after FAPESP is CAPES or CNPq. But usually our students get some reasonable grants. There are lots of opportunities, not only in Campinas, São Paulo, University, Unesp. There are how many universities in São Paulo? Like state university, state of São Paulo, there are like 8 or 10 state universities. And all other good private universities like PUC, etc. So there are a lot of opportunities. I will distribute everywhere some handouts with addresses and descriptions, right?
I
You can explain.
can detail more about. You probably, if you are Brazilian, know
Let
about.
me just check the handouts if they're coming.
Probably you know about CAPES, but many of you are not familiar with FAPESP. And here I just want to give you a few practical tips. So first, as Walter said, FAPESP is a grant, supported grant from the state of São Paulo. So if you want to work as a master student, as a PhD student in any faculty department in São Paulo, you can apply for a FAPESP grant. And well, it's a very good grant. Firstly, because it pays more than CAPES, which we know that is very little, given the amount of money needed to live in this big city like Florianópolis and so on. Yeah, you can.
FAPESP is the only grant that it has a higher amount of money, when we receive a higher amount of money than CAPES in the entire state. So every FAPER, every
Not
state.
actually, FAPEMIG also has, but it's just a little more. But,
Yeah,
but
just to
FAPEMIG
give
is
you-
higher than
To give you an
CAPES.
idea, I don't know, CAPES is how much? 3,000. 3,000. The FAPESP is 5,500 in the first year, and in the second it's 6,600. Yeah. So it's yeah.
Can you write that in the
FAPESP.
the name?
Yeah, you can search this. So
Okay.
this would be like any international student, Brazilian student, if you come to study here at São Paulo in any faculty, you can apply for a FAPESP with the help of your supervisor.
Okay.
So I'll be quick, but just a few tips for you. The first thing that you have to clear out your mind is that at least here in Brazil, people don't see the PhD and master, these graduate programs as jobs. Like I have had this experience many times. Like people ask me, oh, what do you work? And then I say, oh, I'm a PhD student. And then they go like, well, but what do you work?
I had this experience yesterday on the Uber.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly the same.
okay, but what is your job? What do you do when you're not studying? So you have to, even though people have this.
Oh, this is Brazil.
Yeah,
It's America too.
you have to face.
It's America.
You have to face your PhD or your master's project as a job. And what do I mean by this? First, you have to be strategical in your choices. So, like, I have had many bright colleagues that did not succeed because they like, I want to work on this topic. And then they go to a department and say, I only will work this topic. And then the teachers have their own research areas, and then they will say, well, you can't work this here, maybe you want to adapt your project to something more related to ours. And like if you say, no, I won't change my project, I will do exactly as I want, you will get rejected either by the supervisor or because the research grant will see no connection between you and your supervisor. So this is my first tip. You gotta face this as your job. And as a job, you must create opportunities for you. So pick a supervisor that is relevant in the area that you want to work. And if the supervisor asks you to adapt your work, be flexible about it, because you won't have exactly as you want. So that's the first tip, I think. And the second, I think, here at Unicamp, for example, we have many applications every year to the graduate program, but I think at least half is rejected, something like that.
I don't know, maybe Less than half.
Yeah, but it's
most.
about 15 to 20 people are rejected. I've seen this year.
Yeah, this year it was more than that.
Yeah, like more than half of people are rejected into graduate programs. Why is that? Because they don't even talk to their supervisor beforehand. So this is another thing. You gotta talk to your supervisor, to the person you want to be supervised, and just email him. You don't even have to know him in person. Just get in contact. So let's just talk about a few. FAPESP is good, but it's also hard to get on. So you need consistent and good grades. If you have like more than two failures, if you have more than 2 failures in your undergraduate program, it's likely you won't get a grant. So make sure you have good and consistent grades. And another thing that they also value very much is research during your undergraduate studies. So if you are
Maybe I'm asking for too much, but how many the percentage? I mean, 100% in your career, like 90,
Sorry?
89%, like approval, like you have
for
90%.
test approval?
Yeah, 90%.
I'm not sure
80%.
it's varies from the
How many publications you write for that number will help?
Yeah, it's just like I have a feeling from my personal experience and from other colleagues that like if they don't want to give you grants, they'll find any reason possible to not give you grants. Like, if you got a course on your undergrad, say, and there's something you can do here in Brazil, I'm not sure it's very common, you can block a course. You consider inscription that course. This does not count as neither a pass nor a failure. But that stays on your curriculum, yeah. It stays in your register of your undergrads. I've heard from people that they blocked a single course in their entire undergrads, and FAPESP use that as argument to deny the undergrads. If they don't want to give a grant, they will find any reason possible to not give a grant.
Yeah, like you have to have an excellent record. But if you have, many people here at Clip receive FAPESP. So it's not like it's impossible. It's a normal thing. So just to say 2 more things about FAPESP. So like if you want to work here in the state of São Paulo, they also have what is called BEP, which is just an experience studying abroad. So like if you have a FAPESP grant, you can send in a BEP project to work like, for example, I am going in September to Toulouse to work with Hans von Liefeld. And I'm going to stay 1 year there. I love that guy. Can I come with you? Fantastic. And this is all provided by FAPESP. They have I have 1 full additional year to have this experience abroad. Maybe Caio can talk a little bit more about this.
No.
Yeah, Caio has received during his master.
No, during my undergrad.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Just a quick thought. It didn't explain this before, but I also got the BEP grant last year. At the beginning of the year, I went to Germany to study for 3 months there, and I had the FAPESP for my undergrad. I got it now during my master's degree. And I could, when you're in your undergrad, you can spend until 4 months abroad. 4 months abroad. During our master's degree, half a year, so 6 months. During our PhD, a whole year, 1 year. And that is very good because you can receive a monthly salary. You can receive also 3 specific incomes for your funding. So for residency, you receive some money specifically for that. You receive money for your tickets to travel to the place where you're going to study. And you receive money for
medical insurance.
Technical support.
Medical insurance.
Yeah, medical insurance and technical support as well. So, for example, I bought, 6 books in German there that are very expensive. And FAPESP covered them all. It was very good. So it's a good financial grant as well for yourself because you're receiving the specific level, the specific currency of the place. There are some details around them. So, for example, I stayed at Paderborn, which is a small town in Germany, and so my salary, my income was a little shorter than if I went to Berlin because it's way more expensive to live there. And
It's proportional to where you
it's not a huge difference, but it makes a difference. It's important for them. And that is like the best grant you can receive here in Brazil. So it's very important to receive that, not only for your research here in Brazil, but also to have the opportunity to study abroad. And it's a life-changing experience for sure.
And it's like, if you have a best benefit, it's almost like you just have to send them a project that is within the requisites, but it's almost like automatic that they will, because they want people that have applied to go abroad and have this experience.
So that's not bad, it's just a matter of finding a sponsor there. But everyone is like to be a sponsor because they're getting you for free your money, Brazilian money, so everyone is usually very happy with that.
I think this value is not that big. It's much more than that. This value is this stipend.
Oh, I mean, the values, I collected the values.
Yes, yeah, I think it's
somewhere, maybe
PhD is the double of that, more than double. This is less than the master.
Well, maybe I got the wrong information. Anyway, better than that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, just double it.
No, because they are going to be scared.
You can check on FAPESP sites.
They have an English version of the site. And just one more thing that, so for example, for my masters, I'm gonna spend 2 years, right, for the masters. With that, if I take a whole half year, my whole grade is gonna get expanded. So another half year. So that is the case for every grant received for FAPESP. So his grant is going to become not 4 years, but 5 years because it's a grant inside the grant. So they are two separate things, and the research is not exactly the same. It's a specific talk inside your general research. There are some specifics about that, but you get more time for your grant with that.
So about FAPESP, they also have a technical reserve, like you have a percentage of your grant that you will not receive from for your salary, but you can ask from them like, well, I want to go to Argentina to go to an event and present. I can ask for FAPESP and they will give me the money. I just have to justify this.
They even give money for the wine. Do they? No. They don't.
Okay, so about FAPESP, that's about it. You can do your research in the site.
Yes, a question about Walter's comments on the masters abroad. So you mentioned that there are a lot of opportunities for masters.
Main opportunity for masters. But people don't want to take them.
And how is the transition from a master's abroad to getting a PhD there?
Not immediately.
you-
Not immediately. Not immediately. Because they are discontinuing their master program. When you get your master program, you stay, for instance, usually, for instance, Austria has lots of master opportunities. And then you stay 2 years there, and you're not guaranteed you're going to get a PhD. And when you come back to your country, you're losing some opportunity because you lost your, you are coming late, right? So that's why people don't. It's not that they do not recommend. It's a good thing to do, but it's not well accepted, not well regarded. Because even if a PESP is discontinuing their master program, right? So then PESP does not want to give money for master students. You got one.
Yeah, but
You got one also as very
the
PhD, they are much open. So for PhD, they want to give you a PhD grant. Like in the States, I think it's more or less the same. They don't want to give you grant for master. Master means master. I don't say don't go. I would say if you go is that kind of thing in mind. Right?
I have a question about it. doesn't is lose its importance, its relevance. Why the PhD interest admissions exit? Why they are not very accessible to people who have undergraduate? Because
They are.
they are.
You can do a direct doctorate.
You can do direct.
You can bypass the master degree. I did that.
But you enter as master first.
Master first, but I could have. That was my choice, but I could just get my graduate and go direct to the PhD.
And abroad, yes,
But the modality on the FAPESP is different. You have the doctorship and you have direct doctorship. It's two different classifications.
I tell you one thing, I personally like my students to have a master degree. Why? Because they have some time to get material in writing, and in Brazil that's important because they have an extra degree, an extra title. You are a master and you are a doctor. For a public competition, they make a bit of difference. And also in the master thesis, they know how to make a research, how to study, how to write, perhaps in English or in Portuguese or so. So I consider it important, but I know that in the world they are not wanting to give more money for master because it's 2 years more, right? And make you late for jobs, for research and so on. So it's complicated thing, right? I personally like it, but I feel sort of compressed to tell students that that's not a good thing always. You want to say something about states?
Well, let me start by saying that I think a really important thing to do is to make yourself known. And this is reinforcing what you said. Make yourself known to people. Network. Like if you can go to conferences, whatever you can possibly do, you should do that. Reaching out to professors, reaching out to grad students, reaching out to whoever you might be able to contact, and send out lots of communications. You know, even if just 1% of them hit, you never know. It just takes that one. Because what's really going to make the difference in your career is who you've met. It's not going to be just your work. Your work is important, but what's more important is who you know and the networks and the communities you're able to penetrate and become part of. That's really the key. So I would encourage you to try to take advantage of anything you might see around the world in terms of conferences or any opportunities to do anything. I personally, I think I graduated grad school with $100,000 US in debt. And because I knew what I wanted to do and I wasn't going to let money prevent me from doing it. I just say that because if you really want to do this, it's not a lucrative lifestyle. It's something that's going to be difficult to do in today's world. I'm just going to be honest. It was difficult 30 years ago when I did it. But I don't care. I don't have any. Now I'm doing great. Because I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I couldn't do anything else. You know, I wouldn't have been able to do anything else. Let me also say, I personally know a lot of people, and I'm friends with a lot of people around the world. So I can be helpful to you. I'm just going to say that right now. I want to be helpful to you. So you should take advantage of me as a resource, specifically. I've taught in Munich at the Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy. I've taught in Amsterdam at the ILLC. I've taught many places in the United States and a lot of places. So I know a lot of people, and a lot of people owe me favors. So that's kind of my style. So take advantage of that, you know. And for instance, if you got a grant and you wanted to come to the U.S., you should, and it might interest you to come to Boston, you should just come. I would welcome you. So, and we make that work. Now I have to talk about things that are harder to talk about. Northeastern's doing great, and we're going to continue to do well. like a top school, and we're not a target of Trump.
Ivy League school.
We're not a target of Trump or the Trumpistas. We're not on their list. Also, we don't get huge amounts of grant money from the government, so we're not that dependent on that. We have a big endowment, but we don't spend a lot of it, but it's not big enough to be taxed. So we're doing really well. We're getting raises this year. Harvard's getting a 10% pay cut, just to give you a sense. I wish I could be more optimistic about higher education in the United States, but I have to be honest with you, it's not good. The future is bleak. I have to just be very direct with you about this. Having said that, there are still going to be opportunities, and you should really take advantage of those if they arise. Let me talk a little bit about my own situation. My own situation is a little bit up in the air right now for various reasons. So I don't really know what I'll be able to do in the next couple of years. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but
Come to Brazil. You are very welcome here.
no, I appreciate it. But what I meant was I don't know how much money I'm going to be able to spend to support students. I'm trying to be a little bit more concrete here. I was able to do this year, which is kind of a miracle. I don't know how we managed it, honestly, to do it. We shouldn't have been able to do it, but my school is very generous to me. They've been very supportive. Next year, it's very uncertain. Not because Northeastern's in trouble. We're not. We're going to be okay. But there's just so much uncertainty in general in higher education, and also about the economy and other things, that universities in general are being very conservative for next year. The projections are, look, we don't know, so we're being very conservative. So I can't sit in here right now even say that I can do my summer school next summer, which I was planning to do, or that I'll be able to do something like this again next year. I actually do not know. But I'm optimistic that I will be able to do things like that again at some point. I'll know more in the next 6 months. I think the next 6 months, there's a lot of things that are going to be determined. Right now, it's a lot of things very up in the air. But I think 6 months from now, I'll know a lot more, and I'll be in a better position to know what personally I'll be able to do, but also what's going to happen in the landscape of higher education in the United States. Short version of the story is the elite schools are in deep trouble. And it's part of a general strategy, it seems, to, as far as I can tell, it's punitive. It's not about reform. It's punitive. There's a desire to do damage to higher education. It's malicious. I really feel terrible saying that because, when I was growing up, being a professor was very respectable, and I devoted my life to this, 30 years to this, and I've tried to support the community and be as helpful as I can. So it's very difficult for me personally to be going through what's happening in the United States right now and seeing what's happening. But we don't know. We don't know yet how things are going to look in the next few years. So I would say right now everything's kind of on hold. You should expect people to be very wary in the United States right now and confused. But I think by the end of this year, it'll be a lot clearer what's going to happen. But certainly, I just want to say personally, I would do whatever I can to support anyone here, and whatever that means. Certainly, if you wanted to visit me and you had money, that's trivial. That's trivial. We can certainly do that. Beyond that, so I had Giovanni visit. Giovanni had to take off, but I had Giovanni visiting this year from Italy. Will I be able to do that next year? I don't know. I'm not sure. We just don't know what the situation's going to be. People are just putting everything on hold. So we're kind of in a holding pattern right now. I'm going to eventually be doing all this stuff again, sometime in the next couple of years, but it might be a little bumpy for the next year or two, even for me, and I'm in a really good position relative to where a lot of other people are at, because, as I said, the elite schools are really in trouble, and I don't think they realize yet how much trouble they're actually in. I think there's a sense of denial among people, say at Harvard, friends of mine who are at Harvard or any of the other elite schools. I don't think they yet realize what's actually happening. But the way I've been thinking about it is, it's sort of like when a skilled boxer gets in the ring with a grappler, You know how this usually ends? By submission. And the way I would put it is Harvard is a fine boxer, but they're in the ring with a UFC fighter. And they're not really prepared for what's coming. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're kind of in a rear naked choke, but they don't realize it yet. That's where we are.
But we still have the Supreme Court.
Well,
Trump is Supreme Court.
you know, I mean, I don't want to get into too many details about this because it doesn't matter, and I'm still going to be doing everything I can to support students. So I'm not going to stop, and I'm not going to let this prevent me. I'll find ways to do things, but it's bad. And the reason for that is there's really no mechanism to stop what he's doing. If he wants to just withhold money forever from those schools that are on that list, that's what he'll do. Sure, it'll get tied up in court, but that'll take years. And even if Harvard wins in court, which they will on some counts, but not all, it won't matter. Because first of all, suppose you're zoom out. Suppose you're a scientist at Harvard, and I know many of them. Suppose you're a scientist at Harvard, and the situation you're in right now is you've received a stop work order from the government. Not just because the money's not there anymore, it's been withheld, but it's not deeper than that. All the equipment in your laboratory was purchased by the government. Do you know how long it takes to rebuild an entire biological laboratory? It's over. It's over. Science moves fast. If you're a top scientist, you can't sit on your hands for 3 years while this plays out in court. You understand what I'm saying? Even if they win, what does that mean? Trump already has defied several court orders about things that are way more important than how much money Harvard gets. There are gentlemen now in El Salvador, which by the lights of the government itself are there unjustly. They're not being brought back. They've been ordered to be brought back. They're not being brought back. Will they be brought back? I don't know. I don't think so. So you think Trump cares whether Harvard gets money? That's not even important relative to the orders he's already defied. Do you see what I'm saying? This is bad. It's very bad. And I think it's important to be honest about how bad it is. Having said that, I'm not stopping. I'm not letting the orange Mussolini. No, I'm going to keep doing, and I will continue to support my community, and that includes all of you. And we will do the best we can, and we will continue to help a lot of students. That's not going to stop, okay? But it is important to understand how bad the situation is. Not for us personally in Northeast, because we're under the radar. We're not on any of the lists. We're not subject to those taxes or constraints. We're going to be fine. And look, Harvard's going to exist, but the only question is, what's it going to look like? I think it's going to look a lot more like it looked before World War II, before everyone became so dependent on government money, and before the research enterprise exploded. I think a lot of these schools are going to return to more of a small undergraduate liberal arts approach to what they do. And maybe that's what they have to do. Maybe that's just their only choice. And then at least they'll be independent of the government. And that is a good thing. Now, let me say something in defense of what Trump's doing. Because it's not all wrong. He's not entirely wrong. The elite culture of universities in the United States is terrible. It's broken. It's horrible. I left that world because it was toxic. It's toxic. That's absolutely right. And they're too dependent on government money. That's right, too. That's right. The way this is being done is a travesty. Do some of these reforms need to happen? Yes. This is a travesty. He's choking them out. That's not how you reform things. That's how you kill things. Okay? But do things need to change? Yes. And there will be good consequences of this. There will. Schools will be less dependent on the government. That's good, because academic freedom requires that. So it's not all bad in the long run, but in the next few years, it's a very dark transitional period that we're going to be facing, and I think we just have to be honest about that. Yeah.
Just a quick question. You understand the concept way better. So all the big companies in America depend on Lógica, S&P, they really depend on that. So they don't have leverage over Trump, or as universities are becoming less dependent in the government, they will have to be more dependent on companies or.
Yeah. So here's what I think is actually happening. I mean, if you set aside all the culture war bullshit, because that doesn't matter, that's all just a facade, the anti-Semitism, it's all bullshit, it has nothing to do with any of that. That's all just a ruse, it's all just an excuse, it's all just a scapegoat. Here's what's actually happening. It's actually very simple. ever since Reagan, basically all the policies of the US government have been more or less had the effect of transferring wealth from the bottom 50% to the top 1%. That's what's been happening the last 50 years. This is the culmination of that process. We're at the end stage of that game. What does that mean? Here's what it means. What's actually happening is, the way to really look at this is to zoom out from all the politics, because that's a distraction. What's actually happening is a hostile takeover of what's left of the public and nonprofit sector in the United States by the private sector, and specifically by the banks and the tech companies. That's what's happening. And when you see it from that lens, you realize that what we're going to see in the next 10 years is large swaths of what's left of the nonprofit world, and that includes the universities, but they're just a part of that. They are going to be chopped up and sold off, as you do in a hostile takeover, as we would, with complete disregard for the employees. That's how American capitalism has always worked. That's how takeovers always work. That's what this is, and that's what's going to happen. And I think we just have to realize that. So that's really what's going on. What's going to be the effect of that? It ain't going to be good. And the reason it ain't going to be good is research, requires a kind of investment that the kind of short-sighted capitalism that is in favor right now in America is just not interested in making. It's a long-term investment. It's a 30, 50, 100-year horizon. These people are interested in the next quarter and what their bonus is going to be this year. They don't give a shit about anything else. That's what's happening. The rest of it is just political garbage that doesn't, and cultural warfare that doesn't matter. Right? So there'll be all this stuff on the news about anti-Semitism and bathrooms and high school sports, and who gives a shit? None of that matters. So don't be distracted by that. It's a hostile takeover by capitalists of what's left of the public sector in the United States. That's
I
all.
think the real point is some people are more wealthy than countries, like Microsoft people, they have more money than the gross products of Germany.
Of course, because all the policies of the United States in the last 50 years have basically been designed to relocate wealth from the bottom 50% to the top 1%. And we're just seeing the end stage of that game. These are the last little pieces left to be sold off and chopped up. That's what this is. Very important to look at with clear eyes at what's happening and not get distracted by the politics and the gamification and the bullshit. None of that matters. The Democrats versus Republicans, this is all bullshit. Yeah.
For example, I applied for entering the United States this year for Carnegie Mellon, and I don't remember the university, but they told me incredible profile, terrible timing. That's what they told me back.
No, that's right. Everyone's freezing. So what's happening is, as I said, even Northeastern, and I mean, we're still getting raises, but even Northeastern, with respect to the discretionary money, which is the reason I was able to do this, is I have a lot of discretionary money. But that's the first thing that they freeze when they get conservative. That's the loose money laying around. You tie that up when things get scary. Not forever, but until you know for sure what your 5-year outlook is. I'm optimistic about Northeastern, so I'm going to be able to continue on doing. Maybe not next year, but soon after that. Maybe I will be able to do it next year. Don't rule it out. I'm going to be out there fighting to do it, and it might happen, but I just can't promise like I could last year when I was here. It's a very different time. I just can't. It's not that I don't have the money. It's that the university is, sort of circling the wagons, and that's smart because they just don't know. And the way Northeastern operates is they like to be in the black. They like to be very fiscally conservative. They like to know what their outlook is before they free up any money. That's smart, and so I'm in favor of that. I still might be able to do all the things I want to do next year. I'm not saying I won't, but I may not be able to. And the fact that I may not be able to shows you how bad things are. Because Northeastern is not one of the places that's really affected in the short run here. In the long run, Northeastern will be affected by, mostly the only thing that's going to affect us is international students. Because we do rely on international students. But we have an international campus. We have a London campus, we have a Toronto campus, and we're funneling things through that. So we're going to be okay. But it's rough out there. I mean, I'll give you an example. There were a lot of jobs advertised in philosophy this year in the United States. I'm going to say 85 to 90% of them disappeared last month. Not disappeared, but the searches were frozen. Doesn't mean they're never going to happen. But they're not happening this year, and they're probably not happening next year. And this is across the board. I'm not just talking about philosophy. I'm talking about science. Science is actually under more attack in the United States than philosophy is currently. That'll change, but they're going to come for us. That's just later in their game. That's later in their game. Right now, they're going after the big things, where the money is. Science, technology. That's where the money. Hospitals, medicine. That's where all the money is. Okay, that's where they go first. They'll come for us. There'll be a time when they look into syllabi and curricula, and oh yes, this is coming. Oh, it's absolutely coming. And we're ready for it at Northeastern. We're ready for it. We read the Project 2025 last year as a department. We had a private meeting. We know what's coming. They told us what they were going to do. Oh, if you want to know what's going to happen in the United States, read Project 2025. It's on the internet. Just read it. It's a playbook. That's what they're doing. They're telling you. So they're not lying. They told us what they were going to do. We studied it. Most other departments didn't. So Harvard and MIT, these places, they're shitting their pants. We're like, they told you what they were going to do. No one believed them. Everyone's like, oh, Trump says shit. He doesn't mean it. Oh, really? We're not that dumb. We were prepared. We're ready for this. As ready as you can be. But how ready can you be for a tsunami? Do you know what I mean? That's what we're dealing with here. It's a sea change. As I said, I think Northeastern's going to be fine, and I think Boston's going to do okay. But a lot of places in the country are going to really suffer.
MIT?
MIT's in deep shit. I mean, they have 15% cuts across the board this year. Because all the money's gone from the top schools, so they get billions of dollars a year from the government, these top schools. We don't, but they do. Maybe we'll lose 20, 30 million in overhead or something. Okay, we can make that up. In our budget, that's a round up there. It's not a big deal. But Harvard, it's $2.5 billion. MIT, it's like $4 billion. Johns Hopkins, it's $6 billion a year. Operating costs that are coming from the government. So when people talk about endowments don't matter. Endowments don't mean anything. That means nothing. Okay? An endowment is an investment for the long-term future. Okay? They don't spend that money, and they can't spend that money. It's earmarked for all kinds of. They can't just spend it on what they want. It's tied up. It's gone. If you have to make up $3 billion a year, how long are you going to last? You're done. You're not. So I say it's a chokehold. And Harvard's about to tap out. They don't know this yet. No, they're about to tap. That's what's going to happen. It's real. This is real. It's not a drill. Okay? So, but things will eventually get better. Okay? And a lot of schools are going to be okay because we're not going to be targeted. But make no mistake, this is a sea change. This isn't just a fluke thing that's just going to go back to normal in 4 years. That's not what's happening. Science can't wait 4 years. 4 years, you're done. If you're a scientist and you can't be in your lab for 4 years, you're done. You should just quit. Your career's over in any science. So this is a sea change. And I think people just aren't there yet. They're in denial. You know how there's like 5 phases of grief? They're like stage 2. But in 2 years, they're all going to be like, holy shit, it's a new world. Because they don't have the tools to fight. You know, they have a knife and it's a gunfight. Do you know what I'm saying?
What's our view on China? Because we may have...
China's amazing. Oh my God. China's the best. So my friend, and specifically, you need to talk to me about this if you're interested in China. My friend Fenron Liu has a huge logic group in Tsinghua University in Beijing. And they have all the best students. She said to me, she visits Boston every year. Her son's going to high school there. I'm going to have dinner with her.
She's coming here.
She's amazing. I'm going to have dinner with her next week. She comes to Boston regularly because her son is in high school there now. So we see each other a lot. And she said to me, just come to China. You'll get a distinction fellowship. I'll give you all the money you want. And for a minute there, I'm like, I mean, no. First of all, I'm 56 years old. I'm not in a position where I can just move because a lot of places have retirement ages. Like it's not that easy. Plus, I think it's so much money that I can't. They're going to have to drag me out of my job because I'm handcuffed in with golden handcuffs. I have so much money, not just salary, but I need money to do these things. You know?
You're afraid of learning Mandarin. You Americans are not used to foreign language. You don't have to do that. We are prepared to do that.
Hey, look. I'm just saying, I myself for the first time in my life have been thinking about what if I have to leave the country? My wife's a very successful computer scientist. We're not going to have to move, probably. I mean, who knows? It depends how bad it gets. I don't anticipate that, but we have to have the discussion, first time in 32 years, where we're like, well, shoot, where'd we go? Probably Canada or Australia. I mean, we'd be fine. We would be okay. But most places I couldn't go because I'm too old. It'd be illegal for me, for instance, to be hired in Germany, which is sad because I love that place. I used to teach there. But in any event, China's amazing, and you should reach out. And if you want to get in contact, I can put you in contact with Fenron Liu. She's a good friend of mine. They have unlimited resources. They have amazing conferences and workshops they go on all the time. They have unbelievable students. The best students are coming out of China. It's insane, the students that are coming out of China. They're so amazing. And I plan to go there, not this year, because Trump, but maybe next year. I want to really be part of that. I'm trying. So there's one thing to say about myself. I spent many years building this formal epistemology community, which is an international community. But now I want to be more international. I want to South America and China, and that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. I mean, that's part of why I'm here. Is I'm trying to branch out and expand the impact that I'm having in the community that I'm building, and try to draw from many places in the world.
Science in the global south.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Perfect.
BRICS.
I'm trying to do it, but that's what I'm trying to do. So that's part of why I'm here, and so I'm really interested in that. But if you're interested in China, that's an amazing place. I highly recommend looking at opportunities in China, and I can put you in touch with Fenron, and she'll be able to tell you everything. They have unlimited resources. It's absurd how much money they have, and how many events they do, and how many students they have. It's remarkable. I would, if I were you, take China very seriously. Very seriously. Yeah, I think that's the future. If I had to predict where the future of science and higher education is right now, it's China. It's 100% China. I don't think it's even close. I don't think anyone's really going to be close. If they continue on the path they're on, they're just going to dominate. And in a good way. They're supporting logic. They're supporting philosophy. They're supporting everything. You just got to know the right people. But I know the right people, so you can know the right people too. You see what I'm saying? That's the secret, is really trying to make connections. So reach out to me. I think that's the best way, the most helpful I can be, generally, aside from doing things like this, is just by helping you connect and meet other people in the field or in what you're interested in, because I know a lot of people. So let's take advantage of that. And I think through doing that, you'll find your way if you want to continue doing this. It may not be in South America for a while. You might need to go somewhere else for a while, like China. But that wouldn't be such a bad thing. I wish I could do it. Part of me is like, I wish I was a grad student.
May I make a proposal?
Yeah.
Let's make next meeting a RatioLog workshop in China.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
No, absolutely right. Fenron said to me she wants to organize events.
Okay.
The problem will be, one of the problems will be getting visas for students. But it depends where the students are from.
Not hiring for Brazilians.
Oh, okay. Great.
No.
Oh, this is a good idea. This is an excellent idea.
We're not hiring Brazilians. We still have some people there that just finished their PhD and be invited for a postdoc from here.
Okay, we need to talk about this. Maybe next year in Beijing. How fucking awesome is that? Anyway, yes, China, definitely, but also Germany and the Netherlands. And I know people who are there and are doing philosophy and doing logic, and I know and so I can introduce you to people if you need. I think that's the best way that would be helpful, is to help you network, and meet people and get to know people, because that's where the things happen. You know what I mean? That's what makes a difference. It's knowing people in the end that makes your life better. At least for me. Like, the more friends I have, the better my life gets. You know what I mean? And it's,
Still want to make an organization like
yes. Sorry, I'm just rambling now for no
Let me
reason.
ask you a suggestion. Let's make a list, maybe, of the possible American organizations that could work for grant, like Fulbright. So Fulbright is one. That's what people do know.
Oh God. Right now?
Yeah, Fulbright, Templeton, for instance, Templeton Foundation.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing what else.
Yeah, I mean,
Kellogg's.
I think mostly you gotta rely on private things, yeah, unfortunately, because like NSF, oh God, and
National
NIH.
Science Foundation.
I mean, you can try, but there's like, everything's frozen right now.
That's for suggestion.
Yeah. Templeton's good, Fulbright, of course, and you can speak to the
National Science
Fulbright.
Foundation.
Wait, let him speak to the Fulbright.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Explain how
It's my turn. Okay, so
Sorry.
no.
I didn't. Oh, okay. I didn't unplug anything.
No.
Okay. So, for those who don't know me yet, I'm David. For those who know me, I'm David too. Because my name doesn't change. My name doesn't change. So anyway, I'm trying to erase up the humor here. Yeah. So. I'm currently doing my PhD here with Professor Marco Rufino, and my PhD is in philosophy of language. I'm currently under the FAPESP grant, and I study jokes, which means that you who study very serious things have good chances, because if they give me a grant, they can give you grants. Sure. But I'm here now to talk about Fulbright, as we were saying, because I'm currently obliged to say I'm not under a Fulbright grant, because it was not officialized, but I was approved and so on. But so I have good news and bad news about this. As Professor Peterson said, Fulbright is very good for a grant, because they finance you in lots of things. It's like I'm currently trying to get the visa, and they are paying for the visa. I don't have to worry about nothing except doing the interview. Everything else is on their account. So, yeah. Yeah, so it's a really good opportunity, and they have a full PhD, which is the one I got, full PhD grant, and partly, I don't know how to talk about it. Partial, yeah, partial. Right. Partial PhD. I don't know whether they have masters, but PhD is the one I know. Now is the bad news. Yesterday I acknowledged that someone told me that they are not offering PhD for Brazilians anymore from now. I was the last one.
What do you know? This kind of stuff's gonna happen.
Yeah.
This is happening.
Just for Brazilians.
Just for Brazilians. I don't know for other countries.
Well, for my country, they don't offer like anything.
Yeah, because I forgot to talk about that. Fulbright has grants for different countries. They are in very, very different countries.
So Fulbright, the local chapter is the one that funds, not the American. So that's why you actually got money from a Brazilian donor, not an American donor. So,
yeah, because
so the Brazil stopped. That's why you don't have it.
Just turning off the key.
Yeah, that's the thing. The difference, as you were asking, the difference is the full PhD you do the whole PhD there.
Okay.
So I will spend, if everything goes right, I will spend 5 years there. And the partial is like it works like PhD. You are already in a PhD program, and you go and spend 1 or 2 years.
Okay. So come from your wallet.
What?
Fund from your wallet.
Yeah.
To pay. Okay. Do you have to pay the first 2 years? They give you the money?
No.
You just stay there for 2 years.
Yeah, you just stay there for, you are already in a, you are here at Unicamp, and for some reason you don't have a PSP.
Okay.
But you have a CAPS.
Okay.
CAPS. You already have a CAPS grant. And you can try Fulbright to be there for 1 or 2 years. Something like that. So that's the point. The full PhD, at least as far as I know, they are not offering, at least for the next years, anymore. But the partial is still working. And I really encourage you to look for CAPS, because CAPS has some partnerships with like the DAAD. Walter already talked about. I think they have something in Sweden, Norway, some of those Nordic places, and they have a website you can look. And their website, they have all their international partnerships for these grants. But yeah, I encourage you to look for Fulbright besides this point.
Oh,
but
by the way, just a moment. Canada is offering grants for Brazilians. They organize a meeting here at Campinas next week. They're really offering positions. They are really eager to get people there, Brazilians there, right? Canada and New Zealand.
Yes, and that, by the way, this is a thing that's going to happen. A lot of countries that are not the United States are realizing they have a huge opportunity because people are going to leave the United States or not go. Why would you go? No, if you're a student from another country, why would you go? Just the anxiety level of being like, hey, what if I end up in Louisiana? Look, Louisiana's beautiful, but like not the jails. No, this is real. This shit's actually happening. You know, so other countries are going to be offering more money. That's a thing to look for. Oh, and it's already happening. Europe has doubled their science funding to attract scientists from America. Australia, Canada, the same thing. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities in these other countries. Oh, I just have to say, over the next few years, I would be looking more to other countries, just strategically, because I think that's where the resources are going to be, generally. The next few years, anyway. Who knows after that? But
yeah, Guilherme, I would like to invite you to say something. Guilherme was our PhD student here, and he got a very nice grant from Israel immediately.
oh, awesome.
Same day.
Awesome.
Yeah, he finished it
Not the same day,
next day.
a week
A
later.
week later.
Close enough.
Good enough.
Yeah. So, a lot of things that I wanted to say I think are important given what has been said so far. So, we were talking how postdocs and PhDs and so on are jobs. One point is that not everyone thinks like that. So in Israel, I'm a student. Although I'm a researcher, a postdoctoral researcher, I'm considered a student, which is not ideal, but on the other hand, I don't pay taxes. So that's cool. I know that South Africa also has this point of view on postdoctoral researchers. They are students, but they don't pay taxes, which is it's nice. Now, we were talking about the United States, which is not looking good, and I can also say that things are not looking good because I used to receive NSF scholarship, which has been cut. Luckily, Yoni is my PI, my principal investigator. He pays me, in other words. Luckily, he has many other sources of many other grants, and currently I'm being paid by DARPA, which I don't like, but yeah.
No, you gotta take. Look, it's. Would you rather you have the money or them make bombs? Because that's that money's going to be spent.
That's exactly what you said, but I don't like the idea. I don't think they can find applications for like unicorn theories and so on, but I don't like the idea. To talk a little about Israel. Israel has a lot of money for science. I think it has the highest investment per capita in the world on science. Sure?
GDP 6%, the second is America with 2%.
Yeah.
Just 2000.
They really have a lot of money, but I think everyone knows why it may not be the greatest idea to go to Israel right now, or to be affiliated with Israel right now. To give one example, Yon, he has a lot of friends. He wants to hire students, but no one wants to go. And he's offering people they can work from their own countries. They don't need to go to Israel, but people still don't want to go. And I think there is the stigma involved, but there's also the point that it's not as interesting to do a PhD, to do a postdoc, if you can't interact with people. Yeah, I think that's a serious issue. About finances, they pay very well if you find the right people. That's another thing I wanted to say, because there are a lot of people starting their careers right now here in this room. It's important to negotiate. I know that sounds cheap. You know, oh, we are academics, we shouldn't discuss money. No, discuss money.
Yes.
It's important, you know. I negotiated with Yoni, although he started with a very good offer, I negotiated with him a little bit. And later I found out that I'm being paid the highest salary a postdoc can receive in my university. Like,
As you should.
yeah, and I was talking with a few other students, specifically a Chinese student that studied for a long time here in Brazil, that works in topology, I think, and he receives half of what I receive because he didn't bother negotiating the money. Maybe his PI doesn't have as much money as Yoni does, but it's important to negotiate because, and so yeah, nowadays I'm receiving a DARPA scholarship and what is the name? It's a private institution in Israel that gives money to international students that have a great outcome of papers. So they want you to have like 2 papers a year to pay you. And because my salary is already the maximum, I can't use their money, but that money gets deposited in like, I can use this money to travel. Sorry, I can't remember the word right now. So, like, I have $40,000 a year to travel, which I think is amazing. They are very strict how I spend this money, but it's amazing. I can travel to any conference I want.
Even to destroy theory.
Even if I'm ruining other people's work, I still get a lot of money to go to the conferences and talk about that. And yeah, I think Israel has a lot of money. You can find a lot of amazing people there. I mean, Avron for people working on per-consistent logics and non-deterministic semantics. Avron is there. I mean, he's not working with that anymore, but he has a lot of students that can help him with that. But working
Zamansky there.
Anna Zamansky is not working with that anymore. She's working with, I think it's really interesting, animal-computer relationships. So, like, how can you, like, in a farm, you have a lot of egg-laying chickens, and you want to make them as comfortable as possible while using as few resources as possible. So, you want to keep them warm, but you don't want to fry them. And
Not right now.
yeah, not right now, yeah.
For breakfast.
Don't tell them.
Yeah. So she has a software that tries to keep track of the behavior of the chickens to see whether they are comfortable. It's very interesting.
She's using Paracosese Lógica for that?
No, she's not, but she's using logic.
Yeah.
And so I know that it's difficult to consider in Israel right now, but maybe you can. I think you have to wait the good and the bad. We also mentioned DAAD, and I wanted to say something to people that are masters or starting their PhDs. DAAD has an amazing program, is Winterkurs. If you speak German at a B1 level, you can spend 2 months learning further German in Germany, and they really try to bring you to Germany permanently. After you go there for 2 months, this is just an excuse, the Winterkurs. They don't actually want you to learn German. They want you to go study your master's or your PhD in Germany. So it's very interesting. It's very easy to get in. You only need a B1 level in German. And yeah, if you...
Just something, next year there won't be the winter course.
Oh, come on.
It's cancelled, yeah, that was very unfortunate, but it's not going to happen next year.
Okay.
It was cancelled as well. It returned last year, next year, this year also, but next year it's not going to happen.
Oh, okay, that's a shame.
Maybe the other 2027, but
yeah.
not 2026.
So, yeah, that's kind of what I had to
Let me
say.
just clarify something that you said about facing your research as a job. I didn't mean in the institutional sense, of course, because even in Brazil, PhD students, they don't pay taxes because they are considered students. I just meant in the sense that you do not do what you want, whatever you want. You have to be flexible, you have to negotiate with your supervisor.
I completely agree. I was just thinking about postdocs, which are usually considered, you're in a job, you are no longer a student, but there are exceptions. And but no, I completely agree. You should face your research as your job, and otherwise you don't have the energy to actually do research.
Can I just add one point on negotiations? Very, very important. The reason I'm able to do the things I'm able to do now is 25 years of continuous negotiation and renegotiation of contracts. And I've worked at many different universities because you have to be willing to leave. Wait, if you're serious about negotiating, if they call your bluff, you gotta go. So that's why I love Berkeley, that's why I love Rutgers. It's possible that I'll leave Northeastern. My wife and I may be entertaining some offers this year. That's part of why I'm uncertain of what's going to happen next year, or even where I might be. But you never stop doing it. That's how you get the resources to help people. People make the mistake, a lot of people, especially in philosophy and stuff, they make the mistake of thinking, first of all, that somehow it's a moral context. It's not. It's a purely prudential thing, negotiation. It's a contractual relationship with an organization. It's not about people. And secondly, they make the mistake of thinking, well, how much money do I need? It's not about you. This is happening because I negotiated money to support students. See what I'm saying? It's not about you. It's about you, but at a certain point in your career, when you have enough salary, which I've had for many years, I'm not doing that. I don't spend this money on myself. You can now get money to help other people. That's how the formal epistemology workshops happen. That's how this happened. That's how my summer schools happen. That's how everything I do happened. It's personal, discretionary money that I negotiated for these purposes, and that's why I'm still able to spend it, even on crazy shit like this. There's no Northeastern students here. We're not even in America. Where is it? Anyway, that's negotiation. You negotiate, and it's in your contract that you can spend it on these things. That's how you do it. 25 years of continual negotiating, and that's why I'm where I am. 100% right. Forever. Never stop negotiating. Ever.
It's hard to negotiate.
But you got to do it.
And I feel that academics feel dirty when they negotiate.
Yes. They do, and this is wrong.
Yes.
It's a contractual game, and you got to optimize, and you got to negotiate, and that means you might have to leave.
Yeah.
I've left many jobs so I could get what I wanted. And now I have it.
And even negotiating with a journal that are charging you to publish.
Oh yeah, with everything.
No, you want me to publish, you make me free, publish it.
That's right.
So, and they do.
Yes, if you ask. If you
never
don't
paid
ask. Yes, if you don't ask, you never get anything.
Yeah.
The squeaky wheel gets the grease, people.
Let me just ask you one point that I forgot to say about Poland. Poland is a nice place to go. We have been, and they're offering some very nice opportunities now. So Julian and I we got rights
awesome.
there to like to stay there for 3 months twice.
Fantastic.
Now we have a possibility to go again. We were just postponing because I don't want to go in the winter.
Right. Yes, that's right.
Never. But Poland is very nice. It's very well organized in the country now. And there are some students from Mexico and Brazil, and Argentina studying there.
I think there's one place we haven't talked about, Mexico.
Mexico
right now has a lot of storage.
Mexico,
awesome.
Peñalet has one of the biggest storage there are, even more than Brazil right now.
That's great.
It's amazing. Well, Mexico has its problems, but you can go to a university and negotiate with them. They're a little open most of the time. So you go to a public university, and if you pass, if you're an international student, they're gonna give you a scholarship no matter what.
That's great.
That's good.
Every place has problems. Every place has problems.
Yeah, you have to wait around 3 months until they give you the scholarship. So you have to pay 3 months because they are late working the paperwork. That's the only problem.
It was very easy for Brazilians to get there, but not because of Trump, they closed the border.
Well, Mexico is not
Yes.
It's very much harder for Brazilians now to go to Mexico. It was absolutely easy. No need of a visa. No need of a visa.
But don't worry about it. Brazilian is not that problematic. As for example, if I go to Mexico, red alert, Colombia. That's problematic for us to go anywhere in the world.
But don't play defense in your life. Play offense. You gotta be aggressive and you gotta be opportunistic and you gotta always be looking for the next thing and meeting the next person and striving to branch out. That's how you do it. I've been doing this since I was a grad student. And I'm still doing it.
It's already almost 1 p.m., so I think it's time for us to finish this talk, even though it's been great. I also will never get out of here.
Yeah, no, right.
So thank you everyone who's been on the table. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes, so let's talk about that. So please don't forget, we had scheduled at 2 p.m. the tutorials of Python, but it's already almost 1 p.m. So it's really think about rescheduling to 3 p.m.
3 p.m. Perfect, because I need time to prepare.
Yes.
Yes.